The difference between an ordinary day and a life-changing one is often measured in a single second. The lunch rush had just begun when Emily Carter noticed the little boy standing alone near the curb. The autumn air carried the scent of coffee and wet pavement through the open windows of Maple Street Diner. Cars rolled by in steady streams. Conversations blended with the soft clinking of plates. It looked like any other Tuesday afternoon in Hartford. But Emily had learned long ago that danger rarely announced itself. It usually arrived dressed as something ordinary. She balanced a tray of iced tea glasses against her hip and glanced toward the window again. The boy couldn't have been older than 8. Blonde hair, blue jacket, small sneakers tapping impatiently against the sidewalk. Noah Hayes. She recognized him immediately. Everyone in town knew who he was. The son of billionaire entrepreneur Daniel Hayes. The boy was waiting outside while his father finished a phone call beside a black luxury SUV parked near the entrance. Daniel stood a few feet away, one hand holding a smartphone against his ear while the other adjusted the cuff of an expensive coat. Even from inside, he carried the unmistakable presence of someone accustomed to being listened to. Emily looked away and returned to her tables. Table 6 needed coffee. Table 9 wanted extra syrup. The world kept moving. Yet something tugged at her attention. A tiny detail, so small that nobody else would have noticed. Across the street, a delivery truck approached the intersection. Nothing unusual about that, except the speed, the angle, the subtle wobble of its front wheels. Emily's eyes narrowed. The truck wasn't slowing down. A strange chill crept through her chest. She set down the tray. Her pulse quickened. Outside, Noah stepped closer to the edge of the curb, distracted by something in the window display. Daniel remained focused on his call. The truck moved faster. Emily felt every instinct she had spent years trying to forget suddenly wake up. The distance, the timing, the trajectory. Pieces connected inside her mind before she could explain them. Her chair scraped against the floor. Several customers turned to look. Emily was already moving. The diner door flew open behind her. Cold air rushed against her face. "Noah," she shouted. The boy looked up, startled. Daniel turned sharply. Confusion flashed across his face. Emily ran. Her shoes struck the pavement. 1 step, 2 steps, 3. Daniel frowned. "What are you doing?" he called. She didn't answer. There wasn't time. The truck entered the intersection. Still too fast. Still wrong. Emily reached Noah just as he began stepping forward. Without hesitation, she grabbed his arm and pulled him backward. The movement happened so quickly it looked almost reckless. Noah stumbled. Daniel's expression hardened instantly. The phone dropped from his hand. "Hey," he shouted. "What do you think you're doing?" Emily barely heard him. Her eyes remained fixed on the street. The truck roared past the intersection. A loud metallic object suddenly slipped loose from its cargo area and spun through the air. Gasps erupted from nearby pedestrians. The object crossed directly through the space where Noah had been standing only moments earlier before crashing harmlessly onto an empty section of sidewalk. Silence followed. Heavy. Complete. Even the city seemed to pause. Noah stared at the pavement. Daniel stared at the spot where his son had been. Then slowly, very slowly, his gaze shifted toward the shy waitress standing beside the boy. Emily's breathing was steady, calm, but her hands trembled slightly, because she knew something Daniel Hayes did not. That had not been luck, and this day was only beginning. For a moment, nobody moved. The city noise slowly returned, but it sounded distant, as if everyone had stepped into a different reality. Noah looked from the twisted piece of metal resting on the sidewalk to Emily standing beside him. His small face had gone pale. Daniel Hayes reached his son in 3 long strides and immediately placed both hands on the boy's shoulders. "Are you okay?" he asked. Noah nodded slowly. "I think so." Daniel exhaled, relief flashing across his face for only a second before frustration rushed back in. His eyes landed on Emily. "You grabbed my son without permission." The words were sharp, controlled, but sharp. Several pedestrians stopped to watch. Emily lowered her gaze briefly. "I am sorry if it scared him." "Scared him?" Daniel gestured toward Noah. "You ran out of a diner and pulled him to the ground." Emily glanced toward the street. The delivery truck had already disappeared around the corner. "I saw something that did not look right." Daniel followed her gaze. "You saw a truck." "I saw more than that." Daniel folded his arms. "Expensive watch. Perfect suit. Controlled anger. The familiar armor of a man used to being in charge. And what exactly makes a waitress an expert in traffic accidents? Emily did not answer immediately. She simply looked at Noah. The boy was still staring at the metal object lying 20 feet away. "I am glad he is safe," she said quietly. Something about her calmness seemed to irritate Daniel even more. He was accustomed to explanations, apologies, reactions. Emily offered none of them. She simply stood there with the same composed expression she had worn while serving coffee an hour earlier. Before Daniel could say anything else, Noah tugged gently on his sleeve. "Dad." Daniel looked down. "What?" "She saved me." The simple statement hung in the air. Daniel opened his mouth, but found no response. Noah pointed toward the object on the sidewalk. "If she had not pulled me back," he did not finish the sentence. He did not need to. Daniel's jaw tightened. For the first time, uncertainty appeared in his eyes. Across the street, a police officer who had witnessed the aftermath walked over and examined the scene. After a brief conversation with a few bystanders, he approached Daniel. "Your son got lucky today." Daniel glanced at Emily. The officer followed his gaze. "Actually," he corrected himself, "maybe luck had nothing to do with it." Emily shifted uncomfortably. Attention was the one thing she never wanted. Inside Maple Street Diner, customers had gathered near the windows. The lunch rush was forgotten. Conversations had been replaced by curiosity. Emily noticed her manager standing by the entrance. He looked worried. She knew exactly what he was thinking. Tables waiting. Orders getting cold. Business moving. On. Life always moved on. "I should get back to work," she said softly. Daniel stared at her. "That is it." Emily blinked. "Excuse me. You save someone and then just walk away?" A faint smile touched the corner of her lips. Not pride. Not satisfaction. Something quieter. People need their lunches. For the first time since meeting her, Daniel Hayes had no idea what to say. Emily turned and headed back toward the diner. The bell above the door chimed softly as she stepped inside. Noah watched her disappear. Then he looked up at his father. "Dad." "Yes." "Why does she seem different?" Daniel continued staring at the diner entrance long after it closed behind her. He did not know the answer, but for reasons he could not explain, he suddenly wanted to find out. The afternoon crowd slowly returned to their meals, but Daniel Hayes could not return to his. Even after taking Noah home, even after answering 3 calls from executives waiting for decisions, his thoughts kept drifting back to Maple Street Diner. It made no sense. He had spent years negotiating billion-dollar deals without losing focus. Yet somehow a quiet waitress had become the most distracting thing in his day. The rain began shortly after 3 o'clock. Thin drops tapped softly against the windows of Hayes Tower 40 stories above the city. Daniel stood in his office overlooking Hartford while a presentation played on a large screen behind him. Quarterly projections, market forecasts, numbers that normally demanded his full attention. Today they felt strangely distant. "Sir," his assistant Lauren spoke carefully. "Did you want to approve the acquisition proposal?" Daniel blinked. "What?" Lauren paused. "That is the 3rd time I have asked." Daniel rubbed his forehead. "Sorry." "Yes." "Approve it." Lauren studied him. "Everything okay?" "Fine." It was the automatic answer. The answer successful people gave when they did not want questions. Across town, Emily Carter refilled coffee cups and cleared tables as though nothing unusual had happened. If anyone expected her to enjoy the attention, they were disappointed. She avoided every conversation about the incident, every compliment, every curious question. By 4 o'clock, she had almost convinced herself the day was returning to normal. Almost. Then the diner door opened. The small bell chimed overhead. Emily looked up. Noah Hayes stood in the entrance holding a folded piece of paper. Daniel stood behind him. Several customers immediately recognized the billionaire. Whispers spread across the room. Emily quietly set down a coffee pot. Noah smiled the moment he saw her. "Hi." Emily smiled back. "Hello, Noah." The boy walked across the diner and handed her the folded paper. "I made this." Emily opened it carefully. Inside was a drawing. Crayons. Uneven lines. Bright colors. A picture of a diner. A black SUV. A little boy. And a waitress with yellow hair standing beside him. Above the drawing, written in large letters, were 4 simple words. "Thank you for helping me." Emily stared at the picture for a moment longer than she intended. Something softened in her expression. "This is beautiful." Noah grinned proudly. Daniel watched the exchange from several feet away. Something felt unusual. Most people reacted differently around him. Nervous, eager, impressed. Emily seemed completely unaffected by who he was. She was paying attention only to Noah. "I wanted to thank you too," Daniel finally said. Emily looked up. "You already did." "Not properly." She folded the drawing carefully. "A thank you does not need to be expensive." Daniel almost smiled. "Almost. You always answer questions like that?" "Only the easy ones." Noah laughed. Daniel found himself doing the same. The moment surprised him. It had been a long time since laughter arrived without effort. Outside, the rain continued falling against the windows. Inside, for the first time that day, the tension between them eased slightly. Yet as Daniel watched Emily return to her work, a new question settled into his mind. He had spent years learning how to read people. Investors, competitors, partners. He usually understood them within minutes. Emily Carter was different. The more he learned about her, the less sense she seemed to make. And somewhere deep inside, curiosity had already become something stronger. The next morning arrived wrapped in gray clouds, and the steady rhythm of rain against glass. Hartford looked quieter than usual. Streets glistened beneath streetlights that had not yet switched off. Emily Carter stepped off the city bus at 6:45 in the morning and pulled her jacket tighter against the cold. Another shift. Another day. Exactly the way she preferred it. Simple. Predictable. The bell above Maple Street Diner chimed as she entered. The familiar scent of coffee and fresh biscuits greeted her. For a few peaceful minutes, everything felt normal. Then her manager walked over carrying a newspaper. "You are famous." Emily sighed before she even saw the front page. There, near the bottom corner, was a small article about the unusual incident outside the diner. No names. No dramatic headlines. Just a brief mention of a waitress who had reacted quickly when a dangerous situation unfolded near a busy intersection. Emily handed the paper back. "It will be forgotten by tomorrow." Her manager laughed. "Not if billionaires keep showing up here." Emily looked up. "What?" "Nothing." He smiled mysteriously before returning to the kitchen. By 8 o'clock, the breakfast rush had begun. Coffee cups filled. Orders moved across counters. Plates clinked softly beneath warm lights. Emily settled into the comfortable rhythm of work. Then the diner door opened again. Daniel Hayes stepped inside. Alone this time. Several customers noticed immediately. A few whispered. Others pretended not to stare. Daniel ignored all of them. He walked directly to a booth near the window and sat down. Emily glanced toward another server. "That is your section." "Not anymore," the server said with a grin. "He asked for you." Emily closed her eyes for half a second. Then she picked up a coffee pot and walked over. "Good morning." Daniel looked up from his phone. "Good morning. Coffee, please." Emily filled the cup. Silence followed. Daniel watched the rain slide down the glass beside them. Noah wanted to come. But, school. Emily nodded. "That is probably a good idea." Daniel smiled slightly. "You always answer questions before people finish asking them." "Sometimes." The corner of his mouth moved again. Not quite a smile, but close. Emily noticed something different about him this morning. The expensive suit remained. The polished watch remained. The confidence remained. Yet something else had appeared beneath them. Curiosity. Genuine curiosity. "Can I ask you something?" Daniel finally said. Emily placed the coffee pot on the table. "You are going to anyway." This time he laughed openly. A few nearby customers looked over in surprise. Daniel Hayes was not known for laughing. "Fair point." He leaned back slightly. "How did you know?" Emily already knew the question. "About the truck." Daniel nodded. Rain tapped softly against the window between them. Emily stared outside for several seconds before answering. "I noticed the front wheel shaking." "That was all." "No, what else?" Emily hesitated. Her eyes followed a passing city bus disappearing through the rain. "Experience." The word was simple, quiet. Yet something about the way she said it immediately captured Daniel's attention. Because for the first time since meeting her, he sensed a story hidden beneath the silence. And he was beginning to realize that Emily Carter was carrying far more than she allowed the world to see. Daniel studied her carefully. Experience. The word lingered between them long after she returned to taking orders. Most people volunteered information when speaking to him. They explained, elaborated, tried to impress him. Emily Carter seemed determined to do the opposite. She revealed only enough to answer the question and nothing more. For reasons he could not explain, that made him even more curious. The morning crowd grew busier. Construction workers filled stools along the counter. Office employees rushed through breakfast meetings. Rain continued sliding down the windows in thin silver lines. Yet Daniel remained in the same booth, nursing a second cup of coffee he barely touched. Every few minutes, he found himself watching Emily move through the diner. She worked with quiet efficiency. No wasted motion. No unnecessary conversation. She noticed empty cups before customers asked for refills. She noticed dropped napkins before anyone bent down to pick them up. She noticed everything. That realization settled heavily in Daniel's mind. Across the room, an elderly customer stood up from his booth and reached for a cane leaning against the table. Before the man could lose his balance, Emily was already there. Not rushing, not drawing attention to herself, just steadying the chair with one hand and offering assistance with the other. The entire interaction lasted less than 10 seconds. Most people never noticed it. Daniel did. 5 minutes later, a young mother entered carrying a toddler while struggling with a diaper bag and an umbrella. Emily quietly opened the door before the woman even reached it. Again, no attention, no recognition, just action. Daniel leaned back and stared out the window. Something felt familiar. Not the woman herself. The pattern, the awareness, the constant observation of details others missed. He had seen it before. Years ago, during a charity event at a medical center. Emergency responders moved the same way. Calm, alert, always scanning, always anticipating. The thought stayed with him. Eventually, Emily returned with a fresh pot of coffee. You are still here. Daniel glanced at his watch. Nearly an hour had passed. Apparently, Emily refilled his cup. Most billionaires have important places to be. Most waitresses do not tell billionaires they are staying too long. A faint smile touched her lips. Maybe someone should. Daniel surprised himself by laughing again. Then his expression softened. You were not always a waitress, were you? Emily froze for the briefest moment. So brief most people would have missed it. Daniel did not. Why would you think that? She asked. Because you notice things. Emily looked toward the rain-covered street. Lots of people notice things. Not like you. Silence followed. The coffee machine hummed quietly behind the counter. Plates clinked in the kitchen. Outside, a city bus rolled through standing water. Finally, Emily spoke. There was a time when noticing things was part of my job. Daniel sat forward slightly. The answer felt closer to the truth than anything she had shared before. What kind of job? Emily looked down at the coffee pot in her hands. Her expression changed. Not sadness exactly. More like memory. The kind that carried weight. A long time ago, she said softly, I worked somewhere that taught me every second matters. Then she turned and walked away before he could ask another question. Daniel watched her disappear behind the counter. For the first time, he was beginning to see the outline of a hidden story. And he had a feeling that whatever Emily Carter was protecting from her past was far more significant than anyone imagined. That afternoon, Daniel left Maple Street Diner with more questions than answers. The rain had finally stopped, leaving the city wrapped in a cool silver light. Traffic moved slowly through wet streets. People hurried along sidewalks carrying coffee cups and umbrellas. Life looked ordinary again. Yet Daniel could not shake the feeling that something important was hiding just beyond his reach. Back at Hayes Tower, he stood beside the floor-to-ceiling windows of his office. Below him, Hartford stretched toward the horizon. Meetings came and went. Executives presented reports. Investors called. Daniel heard every word and remembered almost none of them. His attention kept returning to a single sentence. Every second matters. The words sounded less like a memory and more like a lesson learned through experience. Real experience. The kind that changed a person forever. By early evening, Noah arrived at the office after school. The boy dropped his backpack beside the sofa and immediately began sketching in a notebook. Daniel loosened his tie and sat across from him. How was school? Good. Noah continued drawing. Did you learn anything interesting? Yes. Noah looked up. Miss Carter was right. Daniel blinked. About what? Paying attention. The boy smiled proudly. My teacher dropped her marker and nobody noticed except me. Daniel laughed softly. And I picked it up before she had to bend down. The smile remained on Noah's face. It made her happy. Daniel studied his son for a moment. Since meeting Emily, something subtle had changed. Noah seemed more observant, more thoughtful, as though he had discovered that small acts mattered. Daniel looked toward the city skyline glowing beyond. The glass. You like her? Everybody likes her. Noah shrugged. She notices people. The answer was simple. Yet it stayed with Daniel long after the conversation ended. Meanwhile, several miles away, Emily finished her shift and stepped into the cool evening air. The city lights reflected across puddles left by the storm. She walked the same route she always took. Past the bookstore, past the pharmacy, past the small park where children played during summer afternoons. Routine brought comfort. Predictability brought peace. At least most days. Tonight felt different. Halfway home, she noticed a black sedan parked across the street. Nothing unusual, except it had also been parked near the diner earlier that morning. Emily continued walking without changing her pace. Her expression remained calm, yet her eyes quietly observed every detail. License plate, driver, position, timing. The vehicle remained stationary. Perhaps it meant nothing. Perhaps not. Experience had taught her never to ignore instincts. She reached her apartment building and disappeared inside. Across the street, the sedan remained for another minute before driving away. High above the city, Daniel stood alone in his office. Across town, Emily locked her apartment door and glanced once through the window. Neither of them knew it yet, but the strange incident outside Maple Street Diner had not ended. It had only opened the first chapter of a much larger story. The following morning, sunlight finally broke through the clouds. Hartford seemed brighter, cleaner, as if the storm had washed something away. Emily arrived at Maple Street Diner a few minutes before 7 and immediately sensed something unusual. The parking lot was nearly empty. The air was still, yet a familiar black sedan sat across the street. The same one she had noticed the night before. Emily kept walking, calm, unhurried. She unlocked the side entrance and stepped inside. Coffee machines hummed to life. Lights flickered on above the counter. Another ordinary day, at least on the surface. 2 hours later, Daniel Hayes entered the diner carrying a tablet under one arm. Noah followed beside him, wearing a backpack and talking excitedly about a school science project. Emily smiled when she saw the boy. Noah smiled back immediately. Daniel noticed the exchange. It was becoming a pattern. Somehow Emily earned trust without asking for it. They settled into their usual booth near the window. Emily brought coffee for Daniel and orange juice for Noah before either of them ordered. "You remembered," Noah said. "You always order the same thing." Noah looked impressed. Daniel raised an eyebrow. "You remember everybody's orders?" "Most of them." "How?" Emily shrugged. "People leave clues." Daniel watched her walk away. That answer sounded exactly like every other answer she gave. Simple, yet somehow deeper than it appeared. 20 minutes later, Noah excused himself to visit the restroom. Daniel opened his tablet and reviewed financial reports while the diner buzzed with quiet conversation. Then Emily appeared beside the booth. Her expression remained calm, but her eyes were focused. "Daniel." He looked up immediately. It was the first time she had used his first name. "What is it?" Emily glanced toward the window. Across the street, the black sedan remained parked in the same position. "How long has your security team been using that vehicle?" Daniel frowned. "What vehicle?" She nodded toward the sedan. Daniel followed her gaze. "That is not my security." Emily remained silent. Daniel lowered the tablet. "Why?" "Because it has been there for 2 days." Daniel sat up straighter. "Maybe somebody works nearby." "Maybe. But you do not think so." Emily slowly shook her head. "The driver changes every few hours. The car stays." Daniel's expression darkened. He immediately reached for his phone. Emily stopped him with a quiet sentence. "Do not look at them." Daniel paused. "What? If they are watching someone, they should not know we noticed." The confidence in her voice surprised him. Not because she sounded dramatic, because she sounded experienced. Daniel slowly set the phone back down. At that exact moment, Noah returned, carrying a paper napkin covered with doodles. Completely unaware of the conversation, Emily smiled warmly at him. The concern vanished from her face so quickly it almost seemed impossible. But Daniel had seen it. He had seen the alertness, the calculation, the awareness. And suddenly he understood something important. The incident outside the diner had never been a coincidence. Emily had not simply reacted faster than everyone else. She had recognized a pattern, just as she was recognizing one now. Outside, the black sedan remained parked beneath the morning sun. Inside, Daniel Hayes felt a quiet unease settle into his chest. Because for the first time, he was beginning to suspect that Emily Carter was not the only person paying attention. Daniel waited until Noah was busy coloring on the back of a kid's menu before sending a brief text message. Less than 5 minutes later, his head of security called. Daniel kept the conversation short, professional, quiet. When the call ended, he looked across the table at Emily. She was clearing dishes near the counter, appearing completely focused on work. Yet he knew she was aware of everything happening around her. The realization was becoming impossible to ignore. Most people looked. Emily observed. There was a difference. By noon, the diner was crowded. The usual sounds filled the room. Coffee pouring, plates clinking, conversations overlapping. Yet beneath the normal rhythm, Daniel felt tension building. Not panic, not fear, just awareness. The same awareness he had seen in Emily. Shortly after 1 o'clock, his phone vibrated. A message from security appeared on the screen. Vehicle identified. Rental registration changed 3 times in 10 days. No direct connection found. Still investigating. Daniel stared at the message. 3 ownership changes in 10 days. That was unusual. He looked up. Emily happened to be passing nearby. You were right. She stopped. About what? The sedan. Emily remained silent. My team checked. And something feels off. She nodded once. Not surprised. Not satisfied. Simply confirming what she had already suspected. Daniel lowered his voice. How did you notice it? Emily glanced through the window. The sedan was gone now. People usually watch what matters to them. Meaning, most drivers look at traffic. That driver looked at the diner. Daniel frowned. You saw that? 3 times. Daniel leaned back slowly. The answer unsettled him. Not because she had noticed. Because she had noticed repeatedly. Most people would have forgotten after the first sighting. Emily had been tracking details without even trying. Across the room, Noah suddenly waved excitedly. Miss Carter. Emily turned immediately. What is it? Noah pointed toward the window. That man was here yesterday. Daniel followed his son's gaze. A man in a dark baseball cap was walking past the diner. Nothing unusual at first glance. Yet Noah continued staring. I saw him when we came for breakfast too. Emily's expression changed almost imperceptibly. A tiny shift. A fraction of a second. But Daniel saw it. Are you sure? She asked gently. Noah nodded. Same jacket. The man disappeared around the corner. Emily looked away from the window. Calm. Thoughtful. Calculating. Daniel suddenly remembered something. Noah rarely forgot faces. It was one of the boy's unusual talents. Small details stayed with him. The same way they stayed with Emily. Interesting, Daniel murmured. Emily looked at him. Yes. Neither of them said more. They did not need to. The atmosphere had changed. Outside, the city continued moving as always. Cars passed. Pedestrians crossed intersections. Office workers hurried through lunch breaks. Everything looked normal. Yet both of them sensed the same thing. Pieces were beginning to connect. And somewhere beyond the diner windows, someone else might already know they were paying attention. That evening, Daniel's security team increased their monitoring without drawing attention to it. No sirens. No visible guards. Just quiet observation. The kind most people would never notice. Yet Emily noticed. The next morning she arrived at Maple Street Diner and immediately spotted 2 unfamiliar customers seated at opposite ends of the room. Both drank coffee. Neither touched the menus. Both spent more time looking through the windows than at their food. Daniel arrived 20 minutes later with Noah. The moment he stepped inside, one of the men folded a newspaper and left. The second followed 3 minutes after that. Emily watched. The sequence unfold while carrying a tray of pancakes. Too precise. Too coordinated. Daniel slid into the booth near the window. Noah immediately pulled out a notebook filled with sketches. Emily approached with coffee. Your security team? She asked quietly. Daniel glanced toward the door. You noticed? They are trying very hard not to be noticed. Daniel shook his head with a faint smile. That good? Not yet. To his surprise, he laughed. The conversation ended there, but the unease remained. Around noon, Noah excused himself to wash his hands. Daniel's phone rang. A senior executive needed an immediate decision regarding a merger. Daniel stepped outside to take the call. Through the diner window, Emily watched him pacing near the curb. The city moved around him in waves of noise and motion. Then something caught her attention. Across the street, the same black sedan appeared again. Different driver. Same vehicle. The car slowed slightly before continuing forward. Emily's eyes narrowed. At the same moment, Noah emerged from the hallway carrying his notebook. He stopped beside the front door, watching his father outside, watching the street, watching everything. Emily suddenly noticed something else. A delivery van was backing into a loading space half a block away. The driver appeared distracted, looking repeatedly at a handheld device instead of his mirrors. Most people would have ignored it. Emily did not. Her gaze moved from the van to Noah, from Noah to the sidewalk, from the sidewalk to Daniel. The pieces aligned instantly. Not danger, not yet, but the possibility of it. And possibility was enough. She set down her tray. "Noah," she called gently. The boy looked up. "Can you help me with something?" Noah immediately smiled and walked toward her. 2 seconds later, the delivery van abruptly stopped after backing farther than intended. No collision, no damage, nothing dramatic. Just an uncomfortable mistake that drew several startled glances from pedestrians. Daniel looked up from his call. Emily was already helping Noah carry a stack of menus. Calm, ordinary, natural. Yet Daniel noticed the timing. When he returned inside, his expression had changed. "You saw something again, did you not?" Emily adjusted the menus. "I saw a driver who was not paying attention." Daniel stared at her for a long moment, then at Noah, then through the window toward the street. The strange feeling returned, the same one he experienced outside the diner days earlier. As though Emily could hear a warning before anyone else. As though she was living 1 second ahead of the rest of the world. And somewhere beyond the glass, unseen eyes might have noticed it too. Later that afternoon, Daniel made a decision he normally would have avoided. He asked questions, not through investigators, not through background reports, directly. The diner had emptied after the lunch rush. Sunlight stretched across the floor in long golden rectangles. Emily was wiping down a table near the window when Daniel approached. "I owe you an apology." Emily looked up. "For what?" "For laughing at you the first day." She studied him for a moment. "Most people make assumptions. That does not make it right." The honesty surprised even him. Emily slowly nodded and returned to cleaning the table. Daniel remained standing. "You said there was a time when noticing things was part of your job." Emily sighed softly. "You do not give up easily." "No," a faint smile appeared. "I noticed." For several seconds neither spoke. Outside, traffic drifted past beneath clear skies. Finally, Emily placed the cleaning cloth aside. "I used to work with emergency response teams." Daniel froze. "Emergency response?" Emily nodded. "Years ago." Suddenly everything made sense. The awareness, the calmness, the ability to anticipate problems before others recognize them. "You were a first responder?" "Something like that." Daniel sat down across from her. "Why leave?" The question lingered between them. Emily looked toward the window. Her reflection stared back from the glass. Quiet, thoughtful, carrying memories she rarely shared. "Because one day I stopped trusting myself." Daniel frowned. "What does that mean?" Emily folded her arms. "It means that sometimes even when you do everything right, things still happen." Her voice remained calm, yet beneath it lived something heavier. Not bitterness, not regret, just weight. Years of it. Daniel understood enough to stop asking. Some stories revealed themselves only when they were ready. At that exact moment his phone vibrated. A message from security appeared on the screen. Subject identified. Individual seen near diner connected to private investigation firm. No known criminal history. Daniel read the message twice. Then a third time. Emily noticed the change in his expression immediately. "What happened?" Daniel handed her the phone. She read the message silently. Her eyes narrowed slightly. "A private investigator." "Apparently." "Who hired him?" "My team does not know yet." Emily handed the phone back. The answer should have been reassuring. It was not. In some ways it felt stranger. A random observer could be dismissed. A hired investigator suggested purpose. Someone was spending money to watch. Daniel leaned back slowly. "This is becoming ridiculous." Emily looked through the window again. Across the street, a man wearing a baseball cap was speaking into a phone while pretending to study a storefront display. "No," she said quietly. "It is becoming intentional." Daniel followed her gaze. A chill settled into his chest. Not fear. Awareness. The same awareness Emily seemed to carry every day. For the first time, he realized something unsettling. He had assumed Emily was stepping into his world. A billionaire's world. A world of business, security, and scrutiny. But maybe that assumption was wrong. Maybe something from Emily's past had already entered the story. And if that was true, Neither of them yet understood how far it might reach. The next morning began with an unusual silence. No black sedan. No unfamiliar faces lingering near the diner. No feeling of being watched. At least not at first. Maple Street Diner moved through breakfast exactly as it always had. Coffee steamed beneath warm lights. Regular customers filled familiar booths. For the first time in days, Daniel almost convinced himself that the situation was fading away. Then his phone rang. It was Lauren. Her voice sounded different. Concerned. "Daniel, there is something you need to see." 20 minutes later, he sat in his office staring at a report spread across his desk. The private investigator had finally been identified. Not by name, by client. Daniel read the page twice before looking up. "That cannot be right." Lauren nodded. "Our team verified it." Daniel leaned back slowly. The investigator had not been hired to watch him. He had been hired to watch Emily Carter. Across town, Emily was carrying a tray of coffee when Daniel walked into the diner earlier than usual. One look at his face told her something had changed. "What happened?" she asked. Daniel slid into the booth near the window. "You were right." Emily placed the tray down. "About what?" "This was never about me." For the first time since they met, Emily looked genuinely surprised. Daniel handed her a folded sheet of paper. She read it quietly. The color drained slightly from her face. Not fear. Recognition. "You know something," Daniel said. Emily remained silent. "Emily." She folded the paper carefully and stared through the window. Outside, a city bus rolled past. People crossed the street carrying shopping bags and coffee cups. Ordinary lives. Ordinary moments. 10 years ago, she finally said, "I worked with a regional emergency response unit." Daniel listened carefully. "There was an accident involving a transportation company." Emily's voice remained calm. "Several investigations followed. And some powerful people were not happy about what was discovered." Daniel felt the pieces shifting into place. "You testified." Emily nodded once. "Yes." The answer explained more than she realized. Her caution, her awareness, her refusal to discuss the past. Daniel looked at the report again. "You think someone from that time is looking for you?" Emily was quiet for several seconds. "I think someone wants to know where I am." The words settled heavily between them. At that exact moment, Noah burst through the front door after school, carrying another notebook full of drawings. The boy smiled the moment he saw them together. Neither adult returned the smile immediately. Noah stopped. "What is wrong?" Emily's expression softened at once. "Nothing you need to worry about." Noah seemed unconvinced but accepted the answer. Daniel watched the interaction carefully. Then something became clear. Emily had spent years protecting herself, hiding, staying invisible. Yet despite all of that, she had still stepped forward to protect his son without hesitation. Not once, multiple times. The realization struck harder than any report. Because suddenly Daniel understood the truth. The woman he had once dismissed as ordinary had been carrying extraordinary courage all along. And somewhere beyond the diner windows, the past was beginning to catch up. The following week brought answers neither of them expected. Daniel's security team continued investigating quietly. Records were reviewed. Old reports resurfaced. Names that had been forgotten for years appeared again. What they discovered surprised everyone. The transportation case Emily had testified in a decade earlier had already been closed. The companies involved no longer existed. The executives connected to it had retired or moved on. There was no threat, no hidden conspiracy, no revenge waiting around the corner. The private investigator had been hired for an entirely different reason. Daniel received the final report early on a Thursday morning. By noon, he was sitting in the familiar booth near the diner window, waiting for Emily to finish her shift. She arrived carrying 2 cups of coffee. One for him, one for herself. A rare exception. Daniel placed the report on the table. "You should read this." Emily opened the folder carefully. Her eyes moved across the pages, then stopped. For several seconds, she said nothing. Finally, she laughed softly. The sound surprised both of them. "What?" Daniel asked. Emily shook her head. "I spent days imagining the worst." "So did I." The investigator had not been hired by anyone from her past. He had been hired by a nonprofit foundation searching for former emergency response workers. 10 years earlier, during the transportation incident, Emily's testimony had helped expose safety failures that eventually led to major reforms across several states. The foundation was preparing an anniversary event recognizing the people responsible. They had been trying to locate her for months. Emily stared at the report. I never knew. Apparently, a lot of people remembered. Sunlight poured through the windows. For the first time in days, the tension seemed to disappear from her shoulders. Noah arrived shortly afterward carrying a folded piece of paper. He slid into the booth beside his father and handed it directly to Emily. I made another drawing. Emily unfolded it. 3 figures stood beneath a bright blue sky. One was clearly Noah. One was Daniel. The third figure wore a diner apron. Above them, written in large, uneven letters, was a simple sentence. Thank you for always helping people. Emily looked down at the drawing for a long moment. Then she smiled. Not the polite smile customers received. A real one. Daniel noticed immediately. You know, he said quietly, I spent years believing success meant solving every problem yourself. Emily looked up. And now? Daniel glanced toward Noah. Now I think it means noticing the people who quietly solve problems for everyone else. The words settled gently between them. No grand speeches. No dramatic revelations. Just truth. The kind that arrives slowly and stays. Outside, the city moved through another ordinary afternoon. Cars passed. Pedestrians crossed streets. Life continued. Yet for Daniel Hayes, something important had changed forever. He had walked into Maple Street Diner expecting to find an ordinary waitress. Instead, he had found a woman whose courage spoke louder than titles, wealth, or status ever could. 3 months later, autumn returned to Hartford with crisp mornings and golden leaves drifting across Maple Street. Some things had changed. Others had not. Maple Street Diner still opened before sunrise. Coffee still filled the air. Regular customers still claimed the same booths every morning. Emily Carter still arrived early, still tied on her apron, still greeted people with the same quiet kindness she always had. Yet there was one difference. She no longer felt the need to disappear. The recognition ceremony organized by the nonprofit foundation had taken place weeks earlier. Former emergency response workers from across the region gathered together to celebrate the people whose actions had helped improve safety standards for thousands of families. Emily never expected to attend. She certainly never expected to stand on a stage. But she did. And when her name was called, the room rose to its feet. Not because she was famous. Not because she was wealthy. Because she had done the right thing when it mattered. Daniel and Noah sat in the audience that evening. Neither of them forgot it. On a quiet Saturday afternoon, Noah rushed into the diner carrying a school project tucked under one arm. Miss Carter, he called excitedly. Emily looked up from the counter. Let me guess. Another drawing? Noah grinned. Better. He unfolded a large poster board covered with photographs and handwritten notes. The title stretched across the top in bright blue letters. Everyday Heroes. Emily smiled immediately. That is a good title. Noah pointed proudly toward the center. There was a photograph of a firefighter, a teacher, a nurse, and beside them was a picture of Emily standing outside the diner. You put me next to all of them? Noah nodded. Because heroes help people. Emily looked down at the poster for a moment, then at Noah, then toward Daniel, who stood nearby holding 2 cups of coffee. Daniel watched the exchange quietly. Months earlier, he would have measured people by achievements, influence, and success. Emily had changed that. Not through speeches. Not through lessons. Through example. Your project is going to get an A, Emily told Noah. You think so? I know so. Noah beamed. Daniel handed Emily a coffee cup. For the record, he said, he was more excited about showing you than showing his teacher. Noah laughed because it was true. Outside, sunlight reflected off the diner windows. Cars rolled past. People hurried along the sidewalk. Ordinary moments filled an ordinary day, the kind most people forget. Yet sometimes those moments reveal the things that matter most. Daniel looked around the diner. At the customers. At Noah. At Emily. Then he remembered the first day they met. The assumptions. The laughter. The mistake. He had looked at a shy waitress and seen someone ordinary. What he failed to see was the courage beneath the silence. The wisdom beneath the simplicity. The strength beneath the kindness. Some people announce their importance to the world. Others quietly improve the lives around them every day. And in the end, those are often the people remembered longest. Because the quiet ones are never truly ordinary.